Okay. Let's try do let's try do some shoulder presses. We'll see. It may surprise you to know that it's about 50%. If you increase the number of students to 30, there's almost 70% chance that two of those students are going to share exactly the same birthday. Call this hash collision. That's when you have the same even though you might have different. It's better than I've probably tried before. That's not something you'd like to see in your hashing algorithms. With a hash collision, the attacker would be able to use their own plain text to match a hash value that you're using for validation. One thing you can do. Okay, let's try to show this again. Attempt to avoid any type of collision. This is a fundamental rule in hashing. Every type of plain text should have a unique hash associated with it. There should never be a situation where the hash is identical. Photographers found the hash collision in the MP5 algorithm. That's the Message Digest Algorithm 5 that was published in April 1992. And they found this first collision in 1996. By 2008, researchers were able to create a certificate authority that was legitimate because the hash was correct, but in reality it was a certificate that they created themselves. In fact, it was not signed by a trusted certificate authority. This is an example of an MP5 collision. We have some plain text at the top. Try again. At the bottom. So almost identical, but there are a number of items as part of the plain text that are different. Those are marked in red with the bold. Those are supposed to give you 20 different hashes. But as you can see here, the MP5 hash is identical. There are a number of cryptographic so we no longer take advantage of it. Instead, we move to better, stronger. But there are situations with downgrade attacks where you may be forced into using some of these older and weaker security mechanisms. An example of a downgrade attack that was used with web servers was identified in 1995. This was the Greek attack. And it took advantage of a vulnerability on web servers to be able to use some very weak encryption keys. This went back to some restrictions that were put in place in the 1990s where only certain sized keys were able to be used for cryptography. These keys were limited to 512 bits or less. Well, with this downgrade attack, instead of you using the latest and strongest key pairs, this attack would force you to use weaker keys. And because you were using weaker keys, that was much easier to brute force and decrypt the information that might have gone back and forth between you and that web server. We've certainly run into our fair share of weak encryption algorithms through the years. One that we often mention is 802.11 web. This was the wireless encryption protocol that was very easy to decrypt. In fact, we were able to decrypt a web key in this series in less than a second. So obviously that's not a mechanism you would want to use on the wireless network. Another form of encryption that can now be very easily decrypted is the data encryption standard, or DES. This uses very small keys relative to what we're using today, only 56 bits. Modern systems can group 56 bits very quickly, so that's the kind of encryption standard you want to use on your network. There are a number of encryption methods that will prevent a replay from occurring. If your encryption method is hashing without any type of salt, or there's no session ID tracking, you want to be very careful that a replay attack is not something that can happen to you. Sometimes an encryption method can be built to automatically mitigate a replay attack. Kerberos is a very good example of this because Kerberos puts a timestamp in the encryption method itself. Even if somebody did capture that information and try to replay it later, it would not be accepted because the timestamp would be after the actual time of day. There are people in organizations that are after your computers and your data. You can call these bad guys or ne'er-do-wells, but the formal term for them is a threat actor. You might also hear these called malicious actors. There are many different kinds of threat actors. They come from different places in the world, and they all have different motivations on what they're trying to get out of your systems. Threat actors use as much information as they can from as many different sources as they can. There's a huge amount of information available on this open source. You go to Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn, gather information, and then use it. One factor is the script kiddie. The script kiddie is someone who runs prepaid scripts to try to find things that they can exploit inside of your systems. In many cases, the script kiddie may not necessarily be the find vulnerabilities. And although we call it this person may not necessarily a script kiddie can be someone on the outside or the inside of your network. Usually it's somebody who's on the outside of your network trying to find these vulnerabilities. That's me done. Let's go down. Let's try to do planche. They're not a large organization, but you're an individual. They're really just looking for vulnerabilities that are the easiest to exploit. They're most often motivated by the hunt for these particular vulnerabilities, and in some way to make a name for themselves, make it so they can brag on the internet that particular vulnerability. Activist is a combination of the word hacker and activist. It's a hacker that has a mission, they have a goal, they're trying to create social change, or they might have a political agenda. Usually this is something outside of your network. These can often be very sophisticated hackers who know exactly what they're going after. Their goals may be websites that nobody visits your website, or they may be going after a very specific website inside of your network. Although traditionally there hasn't been a lot of funding available for hacktivists, these days it's easy to gather funds on the internet and crowdsource. We're finding that more and more hacktivists have a lot more money that they can use towards these purposes. If you're looking for the professionals, then you're really looking for somebody in organized crime. These are almost always somebody who's on the outside of your network, and they're almost always motivated ultimately by money. These are very sophisticated hackers because they have enough money to buy the best in hacking technologies. This is obviously crime that's well organized. So you have an entire org chart, folks, where one person is hacking, another person is managing the exploits, a third person is gathering the data, and perhaps you have a sales team that's selling the data that's being hacked. These folks generally have a lot of capital to fund these projects, and their goal is to make more and more money through these organized crime efforts. Some of the most disruptive threat actors are governments, where you have experts in hacking that are working for a governmental agency. They're usually focusing on national security, and it's usually a hack that's being performed against an external organization or government.
Sorry. Oh, sit.
Oh. Military organizations.
Oh, sit dead.
Security sites. For example, the United States and Israel got together and destroyed 1,000 nuclear centrifuges with a single worm. A good example of how a nation state can work on something called an advanced persistent threat actor. As a threat actor, these nation states have a huge amount of resources available, and they can time, people, and
that's it for that.
find these vulnerabilities on that victim. The type of threat that's very difficult to guard against are threat actors that are on the inside. If you're on the inside of the network, they're already past a lot of the security that you've put in place. We're talking about more than people that are simply leaving their password on a yellow sticky note. We're really talking about people with institutional knowledge. They understand the organization, they know where the servers are located, they understand the IP addressing schemes, they may even have access to a number of these systems. They can address their attacks to systems that are specifically vulnerable, and they can really pinpoint exactly what they're going after. They have extensive resources because they're on the inside of your network. You're effectively paying them to be there, and they're going to spend as much time as possible to find the information that they're looking for. Practically every organization has a competitor, and the competitors